All right.
So
we should
go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying that we should be live in the upcoming seconds. But please, what
So nothing
would you like
weird
to say?
right now, basically. We shouldn't do anything weird.
Yeah,
no, at this moment, this is the crucial time to do something weird before we go live.
Got it. Okay.
Bad jokes, you know.
Are you opening an engineering office in Tel Aviv?
No, so we actually started out in New York, but all three founders are Israeli. And then we recently closed another $16 million round, and we needed to understand where we're expanding. And there's basically an engineering crisis everywhere.
Yep.
But the engineering crisis of New York, we already knew. So we said, let's try something new. So we're doing everything there, marketing, engineering. It's just like a whole new office.
Nice. Very nice.
And we are live.
Yes.
I believe we are live. So all the stuff that we just did, you know, we can just let that to the lace. Nobody saw that, right? They just got a tail end of it. Well, Mike, why don't you start us off and kick off the show for us?
Absolutely. So first of all, welcome everybody, wherever you are, and welcome to the ScaleUp Heroes. So just a quick message. Usually, as you know, it's always the host who kicks off the show. I just wanted to say thank you to Randy Cantrell, who has been doing an incredible job in the last 20 episodes and who kickstarted this podcast, ScaleUp Heroes. And I'm very honored to announce that Ryan Foland is now the host of the ScaleUp Heroes. Ryan Foland is based in Los Angeles and is a managing partner at Influence Tree. Think about him as the black belt of personal branding. So you'll be completely amazed with his dynamism. And Ryan, I pass the word to you as you do it much better than myself.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm excited to be here and for this type of an opportunity to literally talk with heroes, superheroes, essentially, who are around the world coming together to help share their knowledge. And that's why it's called the ScaleUp Heroes. And the idea is to take the best minds who have the real world experience that are taking on the odds to fight whatever crime it is that is the problem that they're solving. And even though these gentlemen today, they are not wearing their capes, I guarantee it's in the top drawer or somewhere near because they're flying around the world creating solutions to some real problems. So we're going to spend some time today digging into questions that selfishly for everybody listening is going to fast track their startup growth and their scale up growth, because we all know more money, more problems, but we're here to talk about how to solve that. So I'd like to thank all of our viewers here live. Hello on Facebook. Make sure to engage and interact, as well as we've got Paul Rivera and Yali Saar. So I'll let you guys do your little intro and some backdrop, let everybody know, and then we're going to dive into some questions that Miguel has, also known as Mike, and we'll kick it off. So Paul, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Paul Rivera. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kalibrr. Kalibrr is a recruitment platform in Southeast Asia. We operate a recruitment platform, essentially a talent marketplace that focuses on white-collar skilled workers in cities like Manila and Jakarta, as well as both the local, regional, and global employers that want to tap that talent pool. I started Kalibrr in 2013 in Manila as a result of being a frustrated employer myself. I was scaling and growing my first business in the Philippines, which was an outsourcing company. And it was while building and scaling that business that I saw firsthand how challenging it was to recruit great people and how frustrating it was for great people to find and discover relevant work. So Kalibrr is kind of the creation and the result of being an employer and a HR professional myself for a few years.
We should definitely start using you soon.
Yeah, that's why I was asking.
I'm Yali. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Tailor Brands. Tailor Brands is basically an automated branding services. We use machine learning to teach computers how to design, write copy, automate your social feeds. Today, we have over 7 million users, businesses using the platform. We raised roughly $21 million to date. And we're located in New York and Tel Aviv.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intros, and congratulations, guys, for what you've been doing. And the topic today is scaling up in the shoes of the CEO, and that's why we have Paul and Yali with us today. And yeah, we agreed some topics to discuss today. Just a quick overview, going from a founding team to a leadership team. How do we keep structuring the org chart as we grow? Talking a little bit about the culture of accountability and how you assure that your team is aligned. We will talk a little bit about cash, and I think that's more than enough to cover in 35 minutes of our conversation. So starting with the first point, you know, when you were the founders in the business, I'm not sure how many founders do you have, Paul, on your business?
I have one co-founder. Dexter is my co-founder. One. There's two of them.
And in your case, Yali?
I have two co-founders, Tom and Adav.
Got it. So I'm sure that in the beginning it was quite simple, especially until the 10 employees, to keep all in touch. But as the business grows, to keep everyone in place, you needed to start building your leadership team. How difficult it was to transition from the founding team to the leadership team. Yali, maybe we start now with you. How was your experience going from 10 people? How many people do you have now?
Today we have 50 people.
Right. So how is it going?
I think that, you know, there are two main things that I always feel that, you know, are issues when you're growing. We had this kind of notion when we grew from 3 people to 7, then from 7 to 20, then from 20 to 50, and it always, you know, the move is always, you know, you feel the same struggle, right? Because you're always basically doubling yourself. It doesn't matter if you're adding 20 people or you're adding 3 people, you're basically doubling the team. I think that 2 things that we really kept in mind throughout the way was making sure that we don't kind of create barriers between us and other people in the team. If you understand that you're weak at something, if you're not a good marketer, for example, and you understand that, okay, you have 2 co-founders, one of them is doing tech, the other is doing product, and you want to bring a VP marketing, you can't start creating that barrier of, okay, we're co-founders, you're going to do marketing, but you're not really in the same place. If you want to bring people that are involved as much as you are, you have to bring them into the discussion table. And the second thing is, you know, it's kind of the same with fundraising. I think that people should have a lot more guts when it comes to hiring good talent. There is kind of a notion that if you start hiring, you know, B players, they'll hire C players, then D players, and so forth. And you really need to aim for that A player. The issue is when you're 3 people, or even when you're 10 or you're 15, you're always going for that next level person, and you don't really understand how to approach him or her. And in that cases, you know, my recommendation is always just go for it. Just cold email people. If you don't know anybody, cold email people. You know, find where those people are. But don't be afraid. Don't just assume that, you know, if you have a business and right now you need the VP marketing of Airbnb, send him or her an email. See if you can get him and her before you just go for the next closest thing, because that's the sort of talent that you need.
Perfect. Sounds a great point. And Paul, would you like to add something? What is your experience?
Yeah.
Going from the founders. Now, how many people do you have at this stage on your business?
We have 110 people split between Manila and Jakarta. The majority of them are in Manila. I think, what I'll add in terms of our own experiences scaling, I think the hardest part about scaling is scaling the culture. What do I mean by that? When you're an early stage startup, when you're often less kind of than 50 people, and you're often just operating in one room, you see each other. You're often able, I think this is one of the things that makes startups special, is you're often able to build a very special, unique culture within an organization just because of the proximity of people that you're working with and the frequency that you're having to interact with them. As you kind of grow a company, that frequency of interaction with everybody, the proximity begins to change. And we saw it firsthand, particularly when we grew from about 50 to 100 employees in a 7-month period. Yali was mentioning something about, getting the best. One of the things that I kind of prided myself on was interviewing everybody. Sometimes even being the first interview of people, just because I wanted to get a sense of fit and culture very early on. And to be honest, I wasn't sure my team could kind of recruit at the same level that I could. It was very hard to do that when we were scaling from 50 to 100, because it took us about 2.5 years to scale to 50. And then to kind of double that in a 6 to 8 month period. That was the first time that we brought on a kind of a recruiter and actually had to manage a recruitment process. And I think it was there that, we, in chasing speed and growth, just made some very small sacrifices around, maybe someone that we may have not hired before because we weren't in such a hurry or need. It would have been someone that we would have hired. And I think that had a dramatic impact in culture, because, when you have 50, 60, 70 people, it only just takes one person to mess everything up, right? You could do a great job curating everyone up until that point, but one person, one mishire can certainly mess up a culture. And I think that is the biggest challenge about scaling that I've experienced, is your culture. When you're going from 50 to 100, we're not a startup anymore. Because a startup fundamentally doesn't know what it's trying to do. It doesn't know what problem it solves. It doesn't have product market fit. Once you have product market fit, once you have a repeatable business, you still want to have the kind of ethos and mindset of a startup, but you need to start thinking like a company. You need to have standardized processes. You need to have systems. You need to have things that can be repeatable, because that's the only way you're gonna scale. And that is a change in culture. That will drive existing employees away who wanted the more freewheeling, unstructured style. It'll attract certain people that want a little bit more of the predictability and stability of a fast-growing company versus an early stage startup. And I think it's only in retrospect that I kind of see firsthand how a culture has to both grow and adapt, because it can't be the same, while also maintaining the things that made the culture of a company unique, weird, and special.
Good. You guys, just writing down some notes at the same time. I would like also to be on the audience side some of these moments. But yeah, and Yali, I really feel that I talk about aligning the life plan with the business plan. And sometimes the founders get out of the corporate world to start up their own initiatives. And when they get to 50, as your case, or to 100, in the case of Paul, they start feeling that they need to start building some rules, some bureaucracy, formalizing a little bit more the strategy. And it seems that there is a conflict between the life plan and the business plan at this stage. So I didn't create this to create rules, to have bureaucracy again in the company. Did you ever feel it already in your company, any conflict between the life plan and the business plan? And by the way, maybe some of the founders would also like a lot marketing, as you said, and maybe they will realize that at this stage of the company needs a professional VP of marketing, and maybe the founder needs to go to another position and to start being part of the leadership team. And it's not, the leadership team is not the founding team only, as you talked in the beginning. So how do you manage these shifts between the life plan ego and the business plan and what the business needs?
We try and just ignore the ego. I think the hardest the hardest thing I ever had to deal with was my co-founders, because it's, you know, everything else is easy, but you went on this journey with two people that, you know, you thought that you knew, and regardless of how much you knew them up to that point, from that point on, it just becomes, you know, it's a ride. And, you know, if you're lucky enough, what you find out is throughout, because, you know, you start out with this kind of shared vision. And as you progress and you encounter more and more problems, you understand that you're really different people. And if you're lucky enough, instead of trying to fight off each other, you feed off each other's, you know, better qualities. So there's actually a very kind of common model for organizational consulting, which is called the PAEI model. I'm sure that you guys are familiar with it, but it basically states that, you know, each one of you would have kind of this strong element of being a producer, an administrator, an entrepreneur, or an integrator. It was very lucky for us, you know, that one of us was an administrator. And, you know, when we just started out, when we were, you know, 3 to 4 people, it really kind of annoyed us, all of the processes that he put in place for everything. You wanted to get a glass of water, there was a process for it. You wanted to kind of release a version, there was a process for it. And as we grew, we realized that we were very lucky for it, because suddenly those processes came in handy. So we never had that issue, you know, very lucky for us, because, you know, every time that we hired a new set of people, I think the nicest thing we ever had was that they felt the processes were better than the company that they came from before, even if it was a huge company. We had a clear onboarding process. We had a clear kind of task force for everything and how decisions are made and how everyone can contribute. It was all very open. And we recently had this kind of encounter when we said, okay, we kept saying, you know, we were always, you know, behaving like we were a 50 person company. And that really helped us when we were 20, 30, 40, and suddenly we hit 50 and we were like, okay, now we need to find out how this company looks like a 100 person company. So when we reach those 60, 70, 80, 90 people, they feel the same thing. So we try and always prepare ourselves in advance and not kind of hit the wall and then start thinking, you know, what's next? And I know a lot of the times it feels like it's unnecessary, but you're going to thank yourself later if you pre-prep for that before.
It's a very good point. Usually when you are already scaling, there is no time to prepare, and the organization can almost implode for excess of demand. It's usually the problem of a startup, which is lack of demand and lack of product market fit. So excess of product market fit, if we can call it, can also kill the company if we are not able to run the new machine. So Paul, I'm sure that in that amazing and epic 6 to 7 months where when you double the company again, it seemed that your infrastructure got completely, you know, out of control. So how do you transform your org chart in the way that you, maybe you needed to move again people from some seats to another seats. So how did you manage all this chaotic process of having so much people joining the company and keeping the culture?
You know, it certainly kind of wasn't easy. But before I answer, I'll kind of add a couple of things regarding.
Of course, with pleasure.
That question that you asked Yali, you know, around roles and life plan. You know, one of the great things that so building a startup in the Philippines is not a common thing. So culturally, the way that, you know, I used to work at Google in Silicon Valley. I used to work, you know, in the San Francisco kind of tech scene. So I come from a very different mindset, and I'm trying to do something that is often or has never been done in the Philippines, which is building tech startups from the ground up. So kind of culturally, it was actually very, very challenging among some of the things that I mentioned. But I think one of the things that I learned is great people, when you work with great people in the Philippines, they want roles, right? They want structure. They want organization. They crave it because they want to do a great job for you and for the company. It's the people that are the B players that they like the lack of structure because they can kind of get under the radar. And so I think being able to build a culture where people crave and want you to build the infra around them so that they can do a better and better job, I think is hopefully something that, you know, a startup and a company can get to, because then you have a culture that's kind of self-reinforcing. It's not just dependent on, you know, what Paul or the founders kind of should do. It's the people at the ground up who are kind of saying, hey, we need a better CRM because the one that we have is crap and I'm not able to be productive. We need to evaluate kind of other things, or, you know, this manager is clearly not cutting it. You know, we need someone better that can coach us or manage us. So I think we've been able to build a culture, you know, where we have a lot of young Filipinos, you know, who have never kind of worked in a startup or never, you know, been outside of the Philippines, kind of caring so much about the company that they want many of the things that, you know, if you're just a worker at a company and have never been part of a startup journey, you know, it may be weird to want to crave order or rules or structure in a company. So I think that you know, I think that's one of the things that I wanted to answer the question around, you know, how do you do it? I think we had just raised a Series A, so we raised $7 million to date, and I think, you know, post Series A, you want to kind of, you know, run out of the gate running very, very strong. Really being able to build and grow the momentum that you raised a Series A with, because a Series A is kind of you have, you know, some track record that you can begin to scale your product market fit. You don't necessarily have a business yet because you may not have great margins, you may not have the best unit economics, but you have kind of the elements that there's a business kind of to be had here. And I think what you're trying to do then is trying to create a lot more of that validation. So for us, it was, how can we get more enterprises on board, and specifically, how can you get more enterprise subscriptions on board? You know, and I think, you know, it was kind of in chasing that growth that, you know, I realized, you know, being able to, you know, scale a sales team, you know, from 3 to 5 people to 20 to 25 people, that's a skill set that many people in the Philippines just don't have. And to do it in where you're selling enterprise software, it's like 2 or 3 people in the Philippines that had that. We made compromises just because we couldn't find the people here. And I think it was in making those compromises that we had challenges in really scaling. So, you know, to Yali's point earlier, like you cannot sacrifice. You know, a B plus, there's a big difference between a B plus player and an A player. And I kind of saw that at firsthand. So, you know, kind of, you know, as a founder, CEO, I mean, Dexter, you you have to make sure you're reacting not just to the metrics, but to what the people in your organization are saying. I think in our case, it was pretty clear that the person that we had in that role wasn't set up to really lead it to where we wanted to go. And so we did a big leadership change while we were scaling that sales team. So that was also quite difficult, but we're still here.
Perfect. That's great. That's why you are ScaleUp Heroes. Yali, something that we have discussed until now, that assuring that having the right people on the right spots, or the people side of the business, is really important. Of course, formalizing the strategy and having everyone aligned is also important. But then execution is critical, and having a kind of a culture of accountability and having a set of meeting rhythms or mechanisms that assure your execution. So how strong is the execution on your company, and how is it related with the culture? And is there any kind of daily stand-ups, weekly meetings, monthly meetings, quarterly meetings? How do you structure your rhythms in the company? Are they informal? Are they formal? So yeah, let us know a little bit more about how do we assure execution.
So it's an ever-changing kind of, we grew from, in the last 3 years, from a company who's onboarding probably like 2,000 new accounts per month to right now we're onboarding probably half a million new accounts per month. You can't run in the same way throughout that process. So the only thing that probably stayed the same is when we started the company, I used to do marketing. My two co-founders, one is doing tech, the other was doing product. And at the end of every week, we didn't want to interrupt each other working. But then every Thursday, we would kind of sync, and we would call it a team meeting. And that team meeting kind of sticked with us. It's just more people right now. But otherwise, it's really about, and I'm going back to what Paul said before, it's really about educating people to find their own way of doing this. If people follow the same guidelines that we used when we were working, the three of us, it wouldn't work right now. So I can tell you with all honesty, I don't know what the daily routines are in the majority of the company, because the tech team has its own routine, and my marketing team has its own routine, and my product team has its own routine. And furthermore, we want to bring people in that we believe that they are grown-ups, and that they know how to manage their time. So if I start saying everybody needs to come to work at 9 a.m. and have this stand-up, this might not be the best way to get the most out of certain people. And the marketing team, knows how to deal with its own kind of structure of people. But then the marketing team suddenly grows, and suddenly, you have an organic team there and a paid team. And maybe it's no longer time to have this weekly marketing meeting because nobody is getting anything out of it. So I think what I'm trying to get at is that you shouldn't, fear change. That's the first thing. You should start with whatever is working for you, okay? And then trust the people that you're bringing in to do whatever it is that works for them. Don't enforce any of your own regimes. And try and focus it down to KPIs or OKRs or whatever it is that you want to work by, but then only have that in mind. If somebody, comes in middle of the night, and you're a morning person and you always believe that, a hard-working person should be in for work every day at 9 a.m. Okay, maybe that's true. But at the end of the month, if he hit all of his goals, then maybe he's doing something right. So find a way to actually measure what it is that you're looking for and drop everything else. Everything else doesn't matter. If somebody in one of the team needs help in structuring, then I can come in and help. But I would never enforce what I believe is right. I would try and understand how his team, his or her team is structured, and how do you build something around that to get the most out of people.
Very interesting point. The org chart of the present or the future, the team of teams, and letting everyone to be autonomous. And it's much easier to scale a bunch of companies than just one company with too much sales. And Paul, what do you think about this point, and what's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, again, Yali, good point. Like, if Yali knew what his marketing team was doing right now, his company hasn't scaled. I don't know the rhythms of my marketing company, how our kind of the push cycle on the development side, the product development life cycle. 3 to 4 years ago, it was something that I was very innately involved in. But now that we have kind of VPs, directors, and or managers, I think we've created a operating culture, but then it's up to kind of those individual leaders to then develop their own, not management framework, but how they'd like to operate their teams. We like to kind of hope that we do a great job at the recruitment side, and kind of, we're bringing, leaders with integrity, certainly the work experience and the skills, but we kind of give them the autonomy to kind of build and manage that team fairly independently. And I think, great A people crave and kind of want that autonomy. That's why they're kind of there in the first place. I think for us, for me, I don't like meetings. Dexter loves meetings. I try to be in as few structured meetings as possible. My style is more of a one-on-one style. So within our company culture, we have a very strong kind of one-on-one culture, where if we need to talk about something, let's kind of just talk about it right now. Or we have very structured one-on-ones, kind of at the CEO to director level, CEO to COO, my co-founder, even me to small groups, kind of entry-level salespeople. We have an open door policy. Kind of our office is all glass, so everyone can see in the company what me and Dexter are doing. We're taking a nap on the couch, and the door is generally open. And I think in the Philippines, it's often a closed door culture. It's very hierarchical. You never see the CEO, you never see the boss. You're never involved in the planning kind of process. We're trying to flip the switch in the Philippines, because I think what technology companies have shown is there's a different and potentially interesting and better way to build and scale companies, and it's not a model that exists in the Philippines. And I think what we're trying to do with the 100 people that we have is hopefully one day they can then build 100 startups, and they now have a relevant set of experiences, directly threaded from experiences that I've had at Google and Silicon Valley, that they can now bring to a country like the Philippines, which, as of a few years ago wasn't a home for startups. Israel has a fraction of our population, but has a super vibrant, probably the second most vibrant tech ecosystem in the world, right? One interesting fact, there's only a few countries in the world where Israel allows visa-free, and the Philippines is one of them. So as a Filipino, you can go into Israel for 59 days visa-free, and it's because the president, like in the early 1930s or 40s, he invited some refugees into the Philippines, and I think a couple thousand of them made it, and I think that was a gesture in kind to allow the visa-free travel of Filipinos there.
So it's actually an interesting story. I never knew about it.
Yeah. There's a monument there in Israel as well. I think the Philippines actually wanted to bring in 100,000, but there was something that blocked them, and I think they could only get 8,000 to 10,000. And so that it's a here in the Philippines, certainly within the Israeli community, it's something that's celebrated and kind of honored.
I think there are very different issues if you look at where Paul is trying to scale a business. And for example, whether you look at New York or Tel Aviv, the issue there becomes kind of there's too little people and a lot of companies that compete for that talent, right? With Paul, I think that maybe the issue is more that there are a lot of people, but at the same time, he needs to understand which one of these people would be able to kind of do the jump from one mentality to something that is completely different. And two different challenges, both extremely hard.
Yeah, I think that's why the context of kind of the advice that people are going to gain from this conversation. I think just you can kind of take it in, but I think understanding your own context, the country that you're building a startup in, the type of startup that you're trying to build has kind of an important impact in terms of whether or not our lessons will directly apply.
And something very interesting for any kind of associations or institutions, governments who are trying to support starting up or startup ecosystems is really to look to the PayPal mafia effect. So all of them as ScaleUp, all of them as jumped out of PayPal and built the management team, all of them built amazing unicorn companies after PayPal. So the impact of just one company in an economy, it's fabulous. It's the 80-20 rule. So, but let's go for the next point. I'm sure that our audience wants to learn more about you before we conclude this show, which is always one of the most important topics when scaling. So growth sucks cash, and if you run out of cash, you are out of business. And typically, we always think that cash is an issue on the starting up stage, but it can be even more difficult on the scaling up stage. Is this true? Do you feel it, or this is bullshit? Yali. You are on mute? Okay, yeah.
I'm popping back in whenever I'm needed. I think that cash is always an issue for people, but it's mainly for two things. The bigger your company gets, and if you don't run a scalable model, and we keep we always think there's only one way, right? For startups, we kind of have this notion of startups needing to raise funds and funds and funds and funds. There are always the possibility of you deciding that, you want to go for a break even or maybe even profitable company. I know it's not a dirty word. You can do it. And then the cash becomes something, much, much easier to handle. I think that two of the main things that I've seen, and it's the raising cash is hard the first time, the seed round. The A round was a bit easier. The B round was a bit easier, but every time it's kind of hell. At least for me, I don't like it. I prefer being in the company and working. But I think that there are two things that I would always recommend. The first thing is, you're in the position of selling. When you're fundraising, you're basically selling. You're selling always. You're always trying to kind of tell people how great it is. And you need to be careful of not overselling to yourself as well in the process, and being very mindful about when do you actually need that cash and how much cash do you actually need, because a lot of people that I see that are kind of running out of cash midway, they simply said so many times to other people that they have so much runway left that they forgot to actually look at the P&L and realize that they have 2 months left and they need to hurry up. The second thing is that, and this is something that I think that we remind ourselves from day one, is don't forget to try, fail, repeat. You're going to fail. You're going to fail, one time or a second time or a third time. And, if you don't give up enough times in the process, eventually you might make it. you have to remember it's not a statistical process. We like math. We like looking at statistics. But at the end of the day, it's a binary process. And when you get the money, you get the money. And no matter how many times you failed along the way, that's the only thing that matters at that specific point.
Thanks, Yali. Paul, what's your perspective and your experience?
Yeah, so we came out of the Y Combinator program a few years ago, and they definitely do a great job of teaching you the art of fundraising, particularly early stage fundraising. So we actually, were able to raise a pretty large seed round, $2 million when we came out of YC. I think, for us, fundraising hasn't always been the easiest, just because the space that we're in, HR tech, isn't the sexiest space for investors to invest in Southeast Asia, because it's still an emerging kind of economy, an emerging internet economy. Investors have tended to invest in the building block industries. So in here, it's kind of logistics, e-commerce type companies. Over the last few years, transportation related. So those types of companies have gotten the bulk of the attention and kind of the bulk of the funding. Second, the Series A, Series B market is developing kind of, the Series A, Series B investors are developing along with the startups themselves. So kind of as the startups begin to need that Series B, what I'm seeing here in Southeast Asia is there's kind of the 1 to 2 year head start that then the investors have had in beginning to create some liquidity for future kind of rounds of funding. So, that I think that makes the Southeast Asia ecosystem unique, because like in the Valley, kind of, you have the angels, the seed, Series A through G, and all the way through an IPO kind of readily available. Here, those later series are still being developed, and kind of as the startups are growing. If there's any one piece of advice for fundraising that I would give, it's something that I learned is when you're fundraising, particularly when you're doing early stage fundraising, you want to try to sell the dream for as long as possible, because at some point you have to sell the metrics, and it becomes a very different type of pitch and sell then. Because if you don't have the right metrics, you're not going to be able to fundraise. And it's often right between that seed and Series A that you have some metrics, but maybe not all. And so you have to be really still good at selling the dream. But we're raising a Series B right now. It's all metrics. It's let me see the spreadsheet. The dream is exciting, but I'm investing in a business now, not necessarily just investing in a founder, which is what the angel seed kind of investors do. So, for as long as you can kind of delay that, but at some point, rubber does have to hit the road, and you have to sell a business.
Perfect. So thanks so much, guys. Just a last, very last point. You have done this several times already during the conversation. But just to wrap up, is any advice that you'd like to give to your younger self 3 or 4 years ago when you started the company? Paul, maybe we start now with you and give some more time to Yali to think.
Yeah. So Kalibrr was the second company I started. I started when I was 29, and like many people who maybe were inspired to start a tech company. You may have been kind of inspired or had visions of grandeur. You may have kind of thought, we're going to do and build something and it's going to be done in 3 or 4 years. If I were to give myself one piece of advice, is just to be patient. I often hear it takes 5 to 6 years to build a good product, 5 to 7 years to build a great company. We're kind of now at that year 6, and I feel like we're beginning to become a great company. I thought we would be here 3 or 4 years ago, but the fundraising conditions weren't right. the market conditions just weren't right. I had to develop kind of the talent to be able to solve the problems that we're doing. And maybe early on in our process, I was maybe a little bit disappointed in myself. But and looking back, I just had an unrealistic timeline. The success and massive success stories that you see are kind of anomalies. The reality is, most people, most entrepreneurs are laying the brick by brick to build that house, and that just takes a bit of time. So I think if you can kind of frame anything you do in life within a decade-long perspective, like I'm gonna set these ambitious goals, and you give yourself a decade-long time frame to do it, I think for most people, they will be able to do it just because you have enough runway to realistically see through that vision. So I think that's what I would tell myself is be more patient. It'll come.
Love it. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, Yali.
Well, I agree with Paul about the advice, but the truth is I wouldn't give myself any advice simply because I know I wouldn't take it. It's one of the things when I started. This is my first company. I started out when I don't remember how old I was. Probably like 24 or 23. And when you blink, suddenly 4 years have passed. But I had to make those mistakes because regardless of how many people kind of gave me the advices that I'm now kind of realizing are absolutely true, I wouldn't be able to take them unless you kind of you get bruised and you wear your own scars. You're not going to take anyone else's advice. So, patience, it would come, but I wouldn't take that advice. I would probably kind of yell at myself and continue on forward and realize that 4 years later.
Perfect. So it was so much fun. Thank you so much, Paul and Yali. It was really a great moment for me and a pleasure to moderate this session. Brian, I'm so honored and so happy also to have you with us. So I pass the word to you.
Yeah, so let's talk about heroes. So Paul, I see you as Batman, and Yali, I see you as the Flash. Okay, so a couple things that I'm thinking here, right? Paul, you're in this environment that culturally is not set up to support the type of growth that you're doing, and I feel like you have this dual personality when you are this one-on-one and you're talking with employees and you're this human, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong and the bat signal comes up somewhere over Manila, and like you just change into action. And you come across very humble, but I know you're the guy that just sits there, like puts on his utility belt and has a tool for everything, like right. One of the things that stuck out most with me is that you're creating a self-reinforcing culture. And Batman is somebody who's trying to enable the entire city with sort of fighting crime on their own. There's always lookalikes, and there's other people that come out and people that pretend to be him because there's this like, I want to be Batman. So definitely I can see you as Halloween Batman this year if you need any ideas. And then Yali, definitely the Flash, because you're just moving so fast through things, but you're conscious and you're aware of those mistakes. But that is what makes you who you are, is moving that fast. And I love the decentralized growth strategy that you have, which is supported by Paul, and that if you don't truly know what your marketing team is doing, you're probably on the right path. So those are the two superheroes that I see within you. And really, if you're listening, what a great example of two individuals from around the world brought together under this, this ScaleUp Academy. And if you want to check out more of these amazing conversations, check out scaleupacademy.io. I would say personally reach out to these people, because somebody on the show said if you want that A talent, just cold call them directly. So now that's out on there on the table. And I even see a lot of partnership between Flash and Batman, because you're both looking to recruit. You've got this recruitment tool. There's a synergy between the Philippines and Israel. So man, what a lot of magic here. What a lot of superpowers that have happened. So I'm excited to have been a fly on the wall. But this fly writes down. And if you see, this is a lot of notes that I've taken here. So it's fun to get to know you guys a little bit, and hopefully we'll be connected from here on out. But again, Mike, thanks for bringing everybody together. What a great show.
Thank you so much, guys. See you next week.
All right.
Have a good morning, good day, good night.
Adios.
Have a good night, and a good morning.
Bye, guys.